Hey, everybody out there. This is John. Just letting everybody know that the guys are taking the 4th of July week off, so we're going to go ahead and play an episode from way in the past. We're going to go back to episode number 2, Electrifying Cars, where we discuss Tesla. Keep in mind, this is an almost 2-year-old episode. We'll be revisiting Tesla within the next few weeks on the show, so we thought this would be a nice time to kind of see what our thoughts were a couple of years ago, where we thought the company was going. I hope you enjoy, and we'll see you next week with a new show from a owner of a car company. Hope everybody has a great 4th. Talk to you next week. Get ready to strap in for another exciting episode of No Driving Gloves, where Derek, John, and Will use over 75 years combined industry knowledge to bring you a bare-knuckled view of the collector car hobby. So let's get rolling. So we're all back again this week, ready to chat about a few things. How are you doing tonight, Will and Derek?
Doing good. I have nothing to complain about.
I always been told that it doesn't really do any good to complain anyway, so...
You're right.
We've been chatting and trying to figure out what we need to chat with you guys about tonight. We're looking at the electric car industry. We're just kind of thinking, that plays way back into the old, electric cars, one of the earliest forms of transportation. And then how they've integrated through the 70s with wonderful little city cars, and that even made an appearance on one of the Discovery Channel shows and such. And whatever the technology is, and then possibly... what Will could maybe even do with an electric car and where that goes. Personally, I've always kind of been into the electric vehicles. I'd like to have an old Bradley GT2 electric or Bradley GT electric or even one of the city cars that's played around. I went and looked at a Volt, which is, a nice mix of a hybrid gas electric, so I don't ever have to worry about walking. Just kind of played with the ideas. Have either one of you really considered an electric car or know anything about them? Or?
Oh, yeah. I this is Derek, and of course, I'd love to have an early, Riker electric or Baker electric or Rauch and Lang. Yeah, any of the early ones for me. Obviously wouldn't be going fast or going far, but I think they're a lot of fun. Driven a lot of them so far in my career, and have a blast with them.
I actually owned one of the Chrysler GM cars one time, and honestly, it was the biggest piece of crap I've ever owned. But when it was right, it was a blast. I mean, we would take it to Pigeon Forge and drive it up and down the street, and but it was just very, very expensive to work on. And, we bought it because we got a really good tax break back then. But we had it a couple of years, and then, it just was so expensive to work on, we got rid of it.
What type of car was that again, Will? I'm familiar with a lot of things, but I don't know if I heard you wrong, or what was that?
Chrysler made them, and they were called the GM, GEM. And they were basically like a bigger golf cart, but they were street legal. They were an open, like an open air car. I mean, it looked like...
Were those like the white, round type shaped things?
Yeah, that's them. They had 2-seaters and 4-seaters, and had a little...
Designed for the senior communities in Florida and such to run around so you didn't pollute up the... community, I guess, right?
I'm no senior, okay?
you never know. The daughter got her application for the AARP, so I don't know what classifies as a senior anymore. She doesn't have her driver's license yet, but she can get her AARP card.
It's all about being senior at heart and having dinner at 4:00 and driving your gem and just living life.
Playing bingo. Right? Well, driving it to the bingo hall,
But you bring up a good point, Will, when you talk about, the gem was so expensive to maintain and do all that. And that's really been one of the downfalls of electric vehicles since the late 1800s. Electric vehicles have been around since the 1880s. In Europe, in America, they've been around. Ferdinand Porsche developed one of the first hybrids right around 1900, 1901, Semper Vivis. But the big downfall has always been because of the battery technology, because of the technology involved. It's always been expensive. Yes, gasoline internal combustion engines, when they first, come out at the turn of the century, are expensive as well because they're new technology. But of course, the petroleum industry takes off, gasoline becomes cheaper, we figure out how to make the engine more reliable, easier to work on, all those things that bring the price down on it. And for some reason, the electric vehicle has had a difficult time getting to that point. We're seeing, I think, some interesting improvements by people like Elon Musk with Tesla and a few of those, but it's still a struggle for a lot of those companies because of that expensive, nature of the beast.
Yeah, and battery technology is just in the last 7 years has just gotten awesome. We're taking batteries that are tiny and able to put them in places where, in these hot rods where you never dreamed of putting a battery, and spinning over 650 horsepower Hemis. And, that ultimately that's what's driving the electric car market too, is battery technology.
Now, out of curiosity, well, what are you finding to be the good the batteries you're using most common? What do you find? Now, I'm not saying, brand wise, but, chemical makeup wise, I use a lot of AGM batteries, the absorbed glass mat, because I can, especially in the early cars, I can lay them down in tight areas and hidden areas where I can kind of run them in. Because of course, you don't really want to run on the old dry cell battery technology anymore. You can, I've done it. But it's a lot easier to use an AGM. But what are you finding for your projects?
We're using the lithium ions in most everything. They're lightweight. I mean, they don't weigh nothing, and they're you can mount them any way you want to mount them: upside down, right side up, sideways. You have to get creative on your battery hold down and stuff like that. But they're so light, heck, you can put them anywhere. So that's kind of what we've been leaning towards over the last 2 to 3 years, is just some really good lithium ion batteries.
What Derek was saying a little bit earlier is that when the electric cars came out, they were in the 1880s, 1890s. They were, and it sounds sexist today, but they were really loved by the women because you could go out, you could start them, they were clean, they didn't throw smoke, they didn't throw oil, they were quiet, but the technology wasn't there. And it's something I say quite often, that everything we have today, we've already invented, we just have figured out how to do it better. And I think there's a chance now that the electric car might be viable. It's technology that's coming along. As we discuss this, I don't know if Will saw the article in one of the major car magazines, I can't remember which, gentleman that went to college just ahead of Will and I in a class, did a race 2-3 years ago from, I believe it was Detroit to New York City, in his Model T versus a Tesla. And he only lost by about 30 minutes with a Model T versus a Tesla. But then again, the Tesla made it, which a couple of years ago would be inconceivable. Model T still made it, amazingly, 100 years after it was built. But he only lost by 30 minutes, and that was because of a slight fuel pump issue. Otherwise, it was just an interesting article to throw it back a little bit.
And the really interesting thing about that, because the gentleman that was driving the Model T and the team that was driving are good friends of, I think, all three of us, or at least we all know them very well.
I forgot you were a coworker with him.
He taught me a lot of what I know about Model Ts, actually. But if you actually add up the distance traveled by each car and the time, if it was a distance time run, the Model T actually beat the Tesla because it actually drove more miles in a shorter amount of time than the Tesla did. But of course, they were just doing first car to the end is the winner. So it's an interesting way to look at it.
Well, that's the typical way of racing. You got to cross the finish line first, and
yeah.
Don't matter how you get there, just get there first.
You brought up the Baker electrics and things like that. What was the technology involved in those, say, at the turn of the century, assuming DC current? I don't even know what the voltage was. Any of the schematics or any of the details that goes back to those? So you start getting into the 70s, you just took anything that you saw and piled in about 40 car batteries, 12-volt car batteries, wired them in, and drove 12 miles until you had to plug it back in for a day, and didn't make them very viable.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the same back with the Baker Electrics, the Detroit Electrics, the Rauch and Langs, all the early electric cars. You were basically taking your, standard, although I will say they used a wet cell technology in those. Of course, the old glass jar style batteries. Inside wooden boxes that sat in the car, under the hood or under the deck lid of the vehicle, which were merely battery storage compartments. And you had a whole bunch of them all tied together, and they were powering a DC motor that would spin. And each company had their own kind of design. Baker and Rauch and Lang, because they were in Cleveland, used L.L. Parker Motors, which was a big electric motor company there in Cleveland. And if I remember right, they ran on about 94 to 96 volts. So you'd set up your battery compartment with being able to put out about that many volts. We can do that today with just your standard car battery or AGM style battery. And the interesting thing is most of those companies, I know Detroit Electric, Rauch and Lang, and the Baker Electric, in their early advertising and your owner's manuals, they were very clear that if you had a brand new set of batteries with a full charge in it, you could go about 80 to 100 miles on a charge. Now, granted, that was at about 25 to 35 miles an hour. So, you were going a good distance, just not very fast.
And that was like going Denver to Wichita, so that you were going downhill most of the way?
Well, if you were going downhill, you could hit 45, so... no, it was, and the battery life quickly wore down on those batteries. And like I say, battery technology, as Will said, it hasn't improved much until about the last decade or so. We haven't seen any major leaps in battery technology, and it's like you say, in the 70s with the commuter car, the city car. They had a lot of problems because, kind of like the Gem, they were an oversized golf cart, and they were really good on flat land. They were built down in Florida, and I think a lot of them wound up out in Kansas and that area because they worked really well on flat land. And if you try to go up a hill with them, it doesn't go very well.
No. Hey, you just think about cell phone batteries. You get a cell phone battery, as long as you charge it up for 4 hours a day, they'll last 2 years and run all day long. And I'm on my cell phone a lot, and it just the technology in that is astounding in what they've done in cell phones in the last couple of years.
Now, I'm trying to remember my old bag phone from like 1987 or 88. I still have one of the first cellular bag phones on a shelf.
Of course you do, John. Of course you do.
Like, I'm an aspiring hoarder, I do say, but I think that phone's got to weigh 20 pounds, and if I remember right, I might get 4 or 6 hours out of the thing. And you're right, my current cell phone, I could go 2 days. I have to charge it every night because that's just the kind of person I am. But yeah, you get a couple of days out of it, a little bit of use, and unfortunately, way too much talk time. But also very good for listening to podcasts. But have either one of you driven any of the newer electric cars? I'm fortunate with the real job that we have an association with the local power company, and I just get myself in situations where I get to drive a lot of the new stuff and the variety of electric vehicles. And a couple of years ago, I hadn't driven an electric car in years, and I think the last one was a City, and then I all of a sudden got into a Tesla Roadster 7 or 8 years ago. And what gets me is what's wonderful about the electric car is if it's set up and programmed right, the 100% torque at, 0 RPMs, you can almost lift the front end of the car off the ground if you want to. It's just, the performance is just absolutely amazing when it comes to some of the newer stuff.
Oh yeah, completely agree. And I've had the opportunity to actually I drove a first generation Prius, or for our British listeners, Prius. And that was interesting. The first kind of generation technology they were using and getting out in that car. And then had the opportunity about 4 years ago, I'd say, to ride in a Tesla. And as John, as you said, it was set up just right. And I mean, the torque ability, in that car and the performance is just incredible, with an electric vehicle. And that has been the one, positive in electric vehicles since the very beginning is they have a ton of torque, at 0 RPM, at the very beginning.
Was that a Roadster you drove, or was that one of the newer Model S's, or?
It was a Roadster, and unfortunately, I only got to ride. They wouldn't let me drive it. They didn't trust me, I guess.
Yeah, they can be a handful. Like I said, it was amazing to me when they told they said, yeah, go ahead and give it a try. And you got to be careful doing that to a guy that plays with race cars, but. It was amazing. I unfortunately haven't had a chance to drive like a P90 or a P100 Model S with ludicrous mode or anything, but heck, that's one of the fastest cars on the planet right now when it's a 4-door sedan with, really an iPad and drives itself, literally. So it's the technology, the rolling computer. Unfortunately, I think I put a post up on the No Driving Gloves Instagram page yesterday or so. We'll say recently, that was at the rate, with all these self-driving cars, pretty soon the country music songs will be about your truck leaving you, not only your girlfriend.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and hopefully if you're nice, maybe it'll decide to come back to you. But it is all of the technology that's coming out is interesting. I'd say a bit scary sometimes as to what, things are going to turn into. But I think it also provides an interesting opportunity for those of us, that either are collectors or restorers or even hot rodders to play around with the new technology. And as we've talked about, electrics have a lot of power. They have a lot of torque. What could that mean for the future of, for like Will hot rodding or for, any application out there? What can we do in the future with it?
Well, what I find interesting and what has been a topic of conversation recently because of some of the vehicles that I'm exposed to is kind of the long-term thinking. You and I definitely being of the restoration history mindset, Derek. We've had a lot of conversations, or I've had a lot of conversations recently with buyers and owners of the Porsche 918, the LaFerrari, the McLaren P1 on what do you do with these cars? What are these cars going to be like? I'm not scared of these cars 40, 50 years from now or in the restoration aspect of keeping them running. The restoration has always kept up with technology no matter what it is. They've had the conversations, all this fuel injected stuff, all the ECUs. What do you do when these are no longer available? And the restoration industry's kept up with them. But when you've got a brand new LaFerrari that is treated like a $2 million, $4 million car that's driven once to auction and sat in a garage until it goes to its next auction. What do you do with the batteries? How do you maintain the cars? What's the battery life? Will the batteries be available? What's the long-term aspect? And I think it's an interesting thing to consider when you get into the collector car hobby, and the current vehicles are all of a sudden these $4 million Ferraris when they get as old as a 62 GTO and they're 50 years old. Will they be viable and usable cars, or will technology dated them too quickly? I think it's a concern, or it's a thought that I've had with a couple of friends I'm fortunate enough to know that would consider buying a LaFerrari and fortunately use them. But like I say, what happens is this technology dates itself. Will the restoration industry keep up with it, or will it get to that lull, and then we've got to wait 20 years till we figure out how to make the thing run again? So,
I think it'll be fine, to be honest with you, because you can take. I mean, even today, this 32 sedan that we built last year, I took a battery out of a '56 Ford T-Bird, and I sent it off. And I had it packed in with all of the new goodies and stuff. So you just, if you're concerned about the originality look of it, that's what you do. You just pull the batteries out, you send them off, and you have them repackaged with the latest and the greatest battery technology. It looks the same. It's going to perform possibly even better. So I don't see an issue with that. But some people are down to the core where it needs to be the exact same inside and out. So, I would be concerned if I was that guy, but being able to keep it rolling and keeping it driving and running properly,
it's not so much the originality. It's so many of these cars are designed around their battery pack. You take a Porsche 918, for example. I think you can watch one of the dream cars, how it's made or something, and they start with an engine, and then they start bolting and gluing pieces onto it, including the carbon fiber chassis that has the battery packs integrated into
that's
it.
True. Yeah, you'd have a little bit of an issue there.
But they'll figure it out. I mean, they'll figure out carbon repair, and a couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to be at Penske's IndyCar shops, and they're autoclaves and reassembling and repairing carbon fiber. So I guess your thinking's correct that we can go back and retrofit it, and I guess that goes back to where I said is the restoration industry keeps up, and maybe you're giving me a different way of looking at it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big challenge that kind of I come from, the standing I come from, is they're going to be an interesting challenge for us in the museum field from the preservation aspect to have these cars in our collections. If we're fortunate enough to have them, which hopefully we will, because it's great to save them and have them out there for people to see. But, not only how do we keep them running in the future, all that, but what what hazardous material issues are we going to have down the road that could do damage to other items in our collections that are around them, and things like that. So it's also interesting when you look out, at, okay, how are these going to degrade and break down over time, and what issues are those going to present, not only for the vehicle itself, but for if they're in a museum setting, for the museum and the objects it has along with these cars.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you're right. I mean, what happens if a battery explodes? It's just sitting there. I mean, you never know.
I want to say that's an existing problem we have with petrol-powered vehicles and storage. And this is going to be a topic for another show, but what do you do with fluids? I mean, we have instances where, brake fluid's going to eat through anything, no matter if you've drained the system, taken it out of the system. You've got that. You always run the risk of explosions with gasoline and that. So it's just a different parameter. It's a different set of, what do I want to call them, MSDS sheets that we have to have laying around. Different ways of training and thinking. And I think, fortunately, if why we're here doing this podcast is maybe to interest some of the younger listeners in the collector car hobby, and that'll be problems that they face and solve. And we're just beginning to discuss some of those concerns. Granted, the 3 supercars I mentioned are more of a hybrid with the gas and electric, but it's amazing how spaceship like they are, and it's not going to be able to bypass the electric. You have to absolutely do that stuff. But the performance aspects are really there, and I think Derek was kind of alluding to it, that it could be an interesting aspect, building kind of street rods, or, I mean, I think the electric technology is working its way in with, don't we have electric superchargers and stuff available now that, you don't rob the engine of performance with a belt, that they're driven off electric motors or something? Or am I dreaming there, Will?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure.
Okay. We've went to electric power steering, so that we have variable control and things like that. A lot of that's integrating itself in. But
yeah, I'm actually doing electric power steering on a car we're building right now. So it kind of happened by accident, which is a lot. How a lot of things happen. To be honest with you, just called a guy today, and he's going to build us a one-off electric power steering system for this Chevrolet Impala we're building. So, and I would love to build a full total electric, street rod, so to speak. I think it would be awesome. The technology's there to bring it into the aftermarket, so to speak, in the hot rod industry. And I think you could do like a pro touring type Camaro, muscle car type build that was an autocross car, and go out there and just kill everybody just because of the torque that you could get coming off of a corner, or, and that's huge in the hot rod industry right now, is autocross. And with the lithium ion battery technology that's out, hell, batteries don't weigh anything. So you're not adding a bunch of unneeded weight. And, I think you could go out there and really compete and build a really neat state-of-the-art car, and it'd be cool.
Yeah, you said that pro touring, and all of a sudden it's crazy the things we remember and we forget. There's a local collector to me that a few years ago actually built, I can't remember, 67 or 68 all-electric Mustang, and was reasonably successful in the build. Ended up being further complications, and he didn't want to go on with that development. He kind of plays with Mustangs, so he pulled all the electric out and ended up building it back with a gasoline motor. But he was experimenting with that, and that had to be 4 or 5 years ago, I'm thinking, when he had that car kind of out and on the road. And I think in 5 years, we're probably to the technology that if he would have just shelved it for a while and pulled it back out, we might have been able to have a pretty viable car. And to say it's just kind of amazing some of the stuff that you forget when you surround yourself by this stuff. And it was a cool car. I've got to have a picture of it somewhere.
It could have been done then. A friend of mine in Wichita, Kansas, that we went to school with, has a Pontiac Fiero that was the world's fastest street legal Fiero for 4 or 5 years. And about 4 or 5 years ago, he got wiped off the face of the earth with a totally electric one. So, it beat his time. I forgot it was at least over a second in the quarter mile, and that was when he called me and told me that. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? And
so that would be comparing a V8 LS powered type Camaro or Fiero to all electric Fiero, or I don't know who we're talking about. We'll have to catch up on that one.
Yeah, it was Ryan Cheney.
Okay.
He had it was a turbocharged 3.8 V6 that he had it in there, and it would scoot, it would move, and he called me and told me that his record got beat, and I'm like, well, you hadn't raced in a while, and he's like, the thing was electric. I'm like, well, get your crap together and get it back.
At least he didn't have an extension cord following him down the strip, right?
True. He didn't have a tail.
And let's not, we can't forget that, the earliest really speed records, when we had the advent of the automobile in the late 1800s and early 1900s, electric and steam cars were setting all of the speed records. It's, not that different from a time 100 and some years ago that electrics, now that they're getting played with again and figured out, are possibly going to, wipe the internal combustion engines out in racing.
It'd be interesting to see if, I'm sure they have a class in Bonneville for that. I'm sure there's probably somebody out there building one right now.
They actually do. They have electric land speed records as well as alternative fuel, and actually the Ohio State University has set a couple of the records in both the electric and I believe it's hydrogen fuel land speed with cool. The Bullet land speed cars that they're building up there.
Mr. Poteet better watch out. He might have an electric car on his heels before he knows it.
I was trying to look that up. Let's see here. Buckeye Bullet has a top recorded speed of 321, and the U.S. electric land speed record at 314.958 miles per hour. It's 508 kilometers per hour. Sounds a lot cooler. So anything that goes over 500, even if it's kilometers.
Yeah.
I think George has held the fastest recorded speed at Speed Week for the last 4 or 5 years in a row with Speed Demon, and I think it's a V8 turbocharged V8 in a Streamliner.
See here, what was the history of that?
The history
just kind of
which?
I was trying to see if there was anything about electric land speed record cars. There's really doesn't seem to be too much, even on Wikipedia. Somebody's got to get busy out there. So,
well, but I think all of it all together, just seeing what's happening at Bonneville with, groups like Ohio State University and their engineering programs, with electric land speed records and all of this, it's only going to drive the technology of hybrids and electric vehicles, further and further forward, and make them more viable as the years go by, because all of those, especially the colleges that are playing around with the technology, they're creating patents that are being the ones that have been created 10 years ago, 5 years ago, are now being implemented into streetcars. And, it's just advancing the technology more rapidly than I think it's probably ever been advanced throughout history of the automobile.
Yeah, I think that's what's going to really drive the electric car, is because it's so tied to computers and electronics and the programming aspects of it, that a lot of the maker programs and the engineering programs, everything's all CAD, CAM, 3D modeling. And to me, just working electric, it lends to a lot of that, the creativity and where the youth is going. I mean, to be honest, it's clean. At least as far as working, you get grease in the wheel bearings and stuff, but there's no icky, dirty motors and such, no grease under the fingernails. It's all done with your laptops and figuring out, I guess, geometries and physics. And so I think we might be of that generation with the creators. I mean, the Edisons of today, I guess Elon Musk with Tesla is the big guy in the room. I mean, you had Fisker that tried it, unfortunately failed, but there's a lot of failures to have a success, and as long as we keep learning from them, we look at what Musk has done. As started with a internet payment service and made some money, and then I'm going to say he went to his love of cars. I don't know if that's true, but he did pay a lot of money for the James Bond submarine car so that he, in theory, or he claims he's going to make it a functional submarine. So he must be some sort of car guy at a level. And, Tesla has been, it's the bull in the china shop right now. That's what everybody compares everything to. He's had the money to put behind it and the technology. I might say the Model X is a little bit over-engineered and might be reaching a little bit too far with the falcon wing doors and stuff. But if you get on YouTube and you can do like Tesla Model X Christmas display, it's got a little programming that, here's your electric car, but you can have fun with it, and the doors flap and the lights flash and tune with certain Christmas music that's pre-programmed into it. So I don't know if either one of you have seen those videos, but it's a new way of, I guess, customizing your car. Getting in and hacking and playing with it and seeing what can be done. I mean, if Tesla can do it, there's nothing to say that an overzealous engineer can't do a little bit of reprogramming and make it do interesting things, we'll say.
Yeah, I don't know about all that. Oh, yeah, I don't know if Christmas music lasts long enough as it is already. I won't be playing any more stuff.
Yeah, but if you got it and you programmed it with some Metallica or anything, what am I thinking? You at least get a little bit out of the Christmas season, or if you thought about programming some Halloween music and the Munsters theme, and the thing opens up with its smoke machine inside and the lights slowly light up, all of a sudden we literally have Christine, I guess.
I do have a programmable Christmas tree that dances with the music, so.
Well, I'll say my grandfather absolutely loves all those C battery animatronics at Christmas. So I've got cars and dancing Santa Clauses, and his house is full of them when it comes to the holiday season.
Our shop is actually on a pretty big U.S. highway, and I submitted a charging station for to Tesla for a destination stop which is something that anybody can do. If you own a business, I think it's a great idea. Of course, I got denied, but I am in a little small bedroom community in Northeast Alabama. So, I wasn't really expecting to get for them to put in a charging station. But, if you are a business owner and you do like the electric car movement, that's something that you can submit. You just hop on their website, and if you own a business and it's like just off an interstate or in a pretty major city, they'll actually come out and hire an electrician and put it in, and it's a destination for people that own Teslas or pretty much any electric car. So, two things: you might pick up a customer, and another thing is you're helping with the movement of this. So that was thanks to a good friend of mine that's at Baylor right now who introduced me to that.
Here we are in our second podcast with this, and we're talking electric. Don't think I don't want to say too green of people, but it's just an amazing technology, and it's kind of a whole difference from what we were talking an episode or so ago about preservation and things. And in the history of automobile, now we're looking at the future of automobiles, and I don't think any of us are saying that electric is greener or nicer or better, but I think if we look at it as just sheer car people who potentially enjoy some performance, enjoy the engineering, enjoy the aspects of it, I really think the electric movement's an extremely influential part of the hobby, and it can't be denied. It might be the new tuning thing. I want to say late 70s is when the hot rod Japanese cars started. The 50s is when we started building hot rods and street rods, or late 40s. There's always been these revolutions that happen every 30 or 40 years, and things change, and we might be there. I don't think the technology is going away, but it's something as car people we really need to look at and evaluate, and not necessarily even knock the guy that shows up at a car show or a car event with a City Electric or a Bradley Electric or a Baker Electric or a Tesla or a Volt, because they're into the cars. A couple months ago or so, I was at one of the local maker spaces in town, just touring it, seeing what they did, and there was a gentleman there, 22, 23 years old, who was building his own high-capacity charger for his Chevrolet Volt that he just bought. And instead of picking on him, which I've been picked on because I even went and test drove a Volt, you encourage him, because that could all of a sudden turn him into a car guy. He's a different car guy than the mainstream guys that pick up a Summit catalog and watch the shows on Sunday morning. But I part of my support of the hobby is if it's got four wheels and you enjoy it, I don't care if it's electric, I don't care if it's gasoline, I don't care if it's foot powered in the Flintstone mobile. We need to encourage everybody to enjoy this hobby.
I agree. Go ahead, Derek.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think one of the things to remember, here comes the history guy in this. When the automobile first came about, people didn't understand it. People didn't like it. People that owned them got ridiculed, made fun of. The cars got called names, whether it was an electric, a gas, or a steam, because the technology that they knew and that everyone was comfortable with was horses and carriages. New technology and new ways of thinking always take time to come online. And, the other thing we have to remember is that cars in whatever fashion they were back then, gas, steam, or electric, were the green option, especially in the large cities, because the horse traffic, it was polluting the cities. And, from the waste from the horses that would die in the streets and be left laying to basically decay where they were causing major diseases within major cities. And the automobile was actually a green source of technology at the turn of the 1800s into the 1900s, 19th century to 20th. And, we're just looking at really right now, I think, another revolution in that fact that, a lot of people are seeing that, the internal combustion engine has some issues with pollution, and they're looking to go to a greener route, a more environmentally friendly route. And we're looking at, the idea of electrics and hybrids again, and how we can use those to do the same thing they did at the turn of the century to get rid of the horses in the cities. The automobile was going to clean up the city.
It's kind of funny when you bring that up, that you talk about horses, and that was the comfort level of the late 1800s, and everybody was terrified of the horseless carriage and this machine that came roaring through town. And now we're sitting here 120 years later, afraid of the car that thinks for itself, when 120 years ago, the horse kind of thought for itself and was kind of self-driving. I mean, it's this a full circle that I guess humanity goes through. We never know when it's going to occur and how you can really look at it. But I guess as you were talking, that's the odd thing that was going through my head. We didn't want to get away from the technology that would think for itself and could react for itself. And now we're kind of, do we want the technology to be able to do that again? So it's just kind of an off thought, and kind of, here I go 90 degrees from the whole conversation. But
going back to what you were talking about a little earlier, John, about supporting the car industry as a whole, and I'm for that wholeheartedly. But V8, that runs through my veins. I will never get away from, a gasoline powered, big block Ford leaving the line at, 7,500 RPMs. There's nothing, there will never be anything that sounds like that or, moves me like that. I'm a hot rodder at heart, and, gasoline powered V8s to me will never leave what I do. I would love to play around with electric cars, but at the end of the day, I'm a V8 gasoline guy.
Oh, come on. Haven't you ever heard the sound of a one-cylinder Benz?
I'm not. I would love to hear it, for sure.
I think I have a actual digital file of that on a computer somewhere. A friend of mine's parents in 1958 took delivery of, it had to be a Mercedes 190 sedan, if I'm remembering a story correctly. And they took factory delivery, flew to Germany and got it. It's a big thing to do now, but they actually did it in like 58 or 59. And they were given a 33 LP of all these Mercedes engine noises, hit and miss, and I swear there's a single cylinder all the way up to the 55 300 SL, cool. Which would be a straight 6. And I convinced him to lend me the album, and I know I put it all on MP3 somewhere. That was back in the Napster days of my life, 2001, 2002. If I can find... I don't throw things away. If I can find that PC in my attic, because I don't pull hard drives, I just shelve PCs. I'll see if I can maybe throw that soundtrack in at the end after the outro for this.
John, if you ever move, don't call me.
If you can't find it, John, I run a Benz Patent Motorwagen replica for the Automotive Hall of Fame, and I have plenty of video of it running at different shows I've had it at.
Cool.
So we'll get the sound of the one-cylinder Benz out there.
I'm going to say, if you've got that, shoot me the video and we'll put it on. Believe it or not, even though we're an only audio podcast, we do release this podcast on YouTube. You can listen to it on YouTube and watch our gorgeous logo, but we could pop up with that video too if everything checks out and we can publish it.
Does it sound kind of like a Briggs and Stratton?
No.
That is a very accurate answer.
I like that little delay there, Derek. There's probably going to be a choice word, but you thought about it, right?
Yes,
we're keeping it clean.
Yeah, we're a family-friendly podcast. We've had 2 opportunities to stray from this show, but we're family-friendly. So, I don't know. I think we've had 3 gasoline guys pretty much chat our way around electric cars, hopefully with some semblance of knowledge. And I had the conversation today with a couple of Ford fanatics about the new GT and about the new Raptor and the new Mustangs and their 6-cylinder turbocharged motors, and the Mustang dropping the 6-cylinder for turbo 4s, and the new Raptor being a 3.5 EcoBoost and the new GT being a 3.5 EcoBoost. We're in a different world now when it comes to cars and performance and everything going turbo. As much as it sounds, I think, Derek's a little bit old school. I'm a little bit old school, and I think Will's right there too, that, he's never going to give up on his throaty V8. We kind of opened this episode with that throaty V8 sound, and we've got different sound effects to pop in through our various intros.
It'd be hard to open it up with an electric car sound.
Yeah, well, that's actually what we did on the first episode.
Yeah, there you go.
That was the electric car running in the background. It was slightly idling. And I guess maybe as we work our way to a close, we're approaching our mark where I like to cut this off so we don't over talk it. My girlfriend, right before we started going out, she had one of the posts about not hearing electric cars and them being silent. And there was a lot of talk many years ago when we started dating that, electric cars need to make noises. People can get run over by them. And she even had that conversation about a friend of hers. And I'm going, they are big. You can see them. But I'm a Lotus guy. And Lotus as a car company has never made any money. But their engineering department is always what has kept Lotus Racing and Lotus Cars solvent. And one of their most recent projects is creating soundtracks that will be able to be played through the electric cars, emulating whether they're 4-cylinders, V8s, depending on throttle input, etc. And I know there's laws either in effect or shortly to become in effect worldwide, and I believe the U.S. is included, where we have to have these sound effects. So what you heard at the beginning of this episode is one of those sound effects that your electric car may soon have, we'll say. Do you guys have anything else, or we'll go ahead and I'll wrap this up and we'll go on to bigger and better things?
I can go on all night, so we might as well just wrap it up.
Derek, are you still there? Or?
I think he dropped out.
Well, we'll go ahead and do the outro. I just want to let everybody know that we've created a Patreon page. It'll help fund this podcast. We're doing it for fun. We're doing it. If you enjoy it, throw a couple of bucks our way. Anything helps. There's some operating cost to this. So check us out on Patreon. We've got different reward levels there. Some of those would be personal consultations that kind of go along more with our labor rates. So they're kind of aggressive goals, but there's also, the entry level, and you can get one of the first edition No Driving Gloves stickers or T-shirts, depending where you go. But just wanted to mention that, get that out there. Of course, we're on iTunes, Google Play, said YouTube. I think we've set up on SoundCloud, so we should be out there for you to listen to anywhere. But I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for this evening, and we'll talk to you later. If you have questions or comments, email us at nodrivinggloves@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to No Driving Gloves using your favorite podcast catcher. Follow No Driving Gloves, one word, on Facebook or Instagram. And most of all, please check out our page on Patreon where you can help keep our tires rolling.